This shot, from Bounce, required snow and road slush to be added to the ground on the right side, along with some digitally created falling snow. The challenge for us was to integrate these elements into a previously filmed background shot out of the windshield of an unsteady moving vehicle with blurry wipers in the foreground. The 3 shots you're seeing in this sequence from Bounce were originally shot for another movie. During the editing of Bounce, a storm sequence at an airport was expanded, so the producers decided to purchase this previously filmed footage and have us alter it to suit the needs of their narrative. As you can see from the splits, we darkened the footage, added computer-generated falling snow, modified all the practical lighting, and, in the case of this wide shot of the runway, added some drifts to give the illusion that the airport was in danger of being snowed in. This is the main title background from The Cider House Rules, and the director's main instruction was that he wanted to evoke a feeling of sadness from this sequence. Our shoot was scheduled for September in Vermont, but the storyline takes place in the dead of winter, so it was decided to replace the entire background behind the train platform with a digital landscape. We also wanted to tie together the 2 locations of the train station below and the orphanage on top of the hill, which in reality were several hundred miles apart from each other. Fake snow was sprayed along the foreground by the film's special effects crew to give us something to blend our digital snowscape into. However, the snow on the train station's roof is also digital, as the structure was too weak to support any on-set additions. All the foreground elements were rotoscoped to isolate them from the background, and the camera move was then meticulously tracked so that a 3D landscape could be integrated in full perspective. Once the foreground left the frame, we were free to change the camera move a little bit to make a smoother zoom into the orphanage structure, which is actually a high-resolution still photo of the real building located in western Massachusetts. These next 2 shots were filmed at the same time from opposite sides of the train. We used rotoscoping rather than a green screen to separate our foreground elements in this first angle, as the screen would have complicated the wide view in the next shot. Digital smoke blended into the train's real steam to layer it together. We altered the tree line on our landscape model to reflect the 20-year advance in the storyline, making the lighting brighter and changing the sky to give a more positive feeling to this sequence. Our digital sun flare was timed to break across the top of the train in sync with the camera move, and we added a bird flying from the sky to a nest, both to give the shot a more organic feeling and to emphasize the main character's homecoming. Since we were replacing the entire mountain, the cars driving off in the distance presented no problems. This is an example of motion tracking a background with very little information in the shot that can be used as reference points for the track. Since no tracking marks were put on the green screen itself, normally we would try using a defined shape like the corners of the window for our references, but in this case the unsteady camera work, dolly move, and focus pull all became complicated when the window corners frequently became blocked by the actors. Our solution was to track the shot in pieces, stitch all the data together, and then massage the rough spots until we had everything flowing just right. The practical still cameras on set became a bit of an ordeal for the cinematographer in this shot, since there were far too few working flash guns and many of them managed to fire off in between frames. In fact, only 2 real flashes registered on film in the 23-second duration of this shot. Digital lens flares and animated interactive lighting solved all these problems, and we were also able to add a few appropriate glints and twinkles to the actress's jewelry. This was an instance where digital image processing saved a production from near disaster. A handling accident occurred during the negative cutting, and a critical piece of the original camera negative was ripped completely in half. We were called in and had the film patched and very carefully scanned as soon as possible to minimize any further damage. During the paintwork, it was discovered that the necessary tape splice caused an exposure shift and misalignment to the film as it passed through the scanner. As you can see by the lower portion of the frame, all these problems were corrected and the audience never knew. Sometimes we're asked to enhance the production value of a location. In this instance, we doubled the size of the existing set and gave it a little depth to carry it off toward the horizon. We also added a line of people walking in the middle ground on the left, just to place some life in that part of the shot. Computer-generated smoke was matched to the on-set atmospherics, and we rotoscoped the foreground performers over our digital set extension. The director of this film was very specific that he wanted a leopard to be wandering across the desert landscape in this sequence, and since we were shooting in Morocco, it wasn't cost-effective to have a trained one brought in. The solution was to find some stock footage that could be digitally manipulated to suit our needs, and after a fairly extensive search, we came across the shot you see in the upper left. We took out the camera move, rotoscoped the leopard out of the background, relit and reshadowed him to match the new background, and as an added touch even mapped his digital shadow so it would bend over the larger rocks it crossed. As it turned out, the desert background was shot with an unsteady camera and had a scratch in the frame, so we managed to correct all that as well. Originally, this sequence was to have been shot at an actual lake, but the production realized it was more cost-effective to combine this with another sequence where our group of 200 extras would also be needed. The only issue being that the other sequence was in a desert location, nowhere near any real body of water. Since we were slated to multiply the group of extras into a crowd of thousands anyway, digital background elements were incorporated to change the location of the shot. The vertical blue line in the left image is an emulsion scratch, which was the unfortunate byproduct of shooting in an extremely dusty desert location. In this case, we used the tools normally associated with wire removal to erase the scratch and repair several shots for this sequence. We're showing you this footage in slow motion for a minute so you can see what we did a little more clearly. This sequence from Miss Congeniality required a performer to handle flaming batons while going through some elaborate cheerleading maneuvers. Although there was actual fire on the batons on the set, the twirling motions made the real flames seem far less impressive than they should, so the decision was made to enhance the fire digitally. We shot some actual fire and hand-tracked it to the batons, rotoscoping it behind the performer's body when necessary and curving it with distortion filters to follow the baton's arc. Some motion blurring was applied along with a slight glow to give the fire a little extra heat. In this sequence, we altered the set to make the aftermath of an explosion look as though a lot more damage had occurred. Stock fire elements were added, along with appropriate flicker animation for interactive lighting, and digital painting was used to generate both more damage on the set pieces and to chop part of the set away. On this wider shot, where the fire is in soft focus, special camera blur filters were used to simulate spherical lens aberrations in the fire, rather than just an overall digital softening of the image. In this way, the digital components looked as though they were photographed by an actual camera rather than being pasted in. This was a tricky setup for the cinematographer of a TV spot. The actor and set actually are underwater, and it was difficult to calculate what the density of the water was doing to the exposure of the practical lights on the set. The box light at the top of the upper frame is actually illuminated, but it was so severely underexposed it looked as though it was turned off. Digital tracking and rotoscoping corrected the exposure issues, and a computer-generated light beam was also tracked to the fixture to complete the effect. The bullet hit wired to this actor was a little too powerful and wound up atomizing the fake blood as it detonated, leaving a mist in the air rather than the natural spray that the director wanted. Computer-generated particle animation was used to add thickness to the blood spray and enhance the realism of the hit. A muzzle flash was also added to the pistol since the gun's real flash went off in between frames. This example shows how an erratic handheld camera move can be smoothed out to save a shot that might otherwise be unusable. Points in the image are tracked so that any vertical, horizontal, or rotational motion can either be minimized or totally negated, giving full stability to the shot. If desired, a brand new motion can be introduced with appropriate camera blurring and randomness, just to add a little bit in the way of organic motion. Sometimes, no matter how many precautions are taken, unknown factors can cause damage. In this unfortunate instance, there were dirt problems with a particular short end of film that had been recanned, and the problem wasn't discovered until developing revealed it. Image restoration of this nature can be extremely difficult and time-consuming depending on the complexity of the visual and the damage. In this case, digital paint techniques were able to restore the image to its original state. An editorial restructuring caused one sequence in View from the Top to become a night scene rather than a day one. This required digital processing of an establishing shot of the location to avoid a costly reshoot. Lighting values were altered in sections for each of the windows, highlights were meticulously painted out of the scene, a gradation was added to the sky, and we also added security lights to the staircase. Exposures and color values were then all balanced together to achieve a believable nighttime effect. This day-for-night shot required some weather enhancement as well. Falling digital snow was added in several layers to give some depth. We also put in some 3D snow drifts and road slush, and dirty snow residue was painted onto the parked vehicles. Headlights and taillights were added to the moving car, and additional falling snow was added to the digital headlight beams. The windows of the house were isolated and balanced to stay bright while we darkened the background, and reactive lighting on the snowdrifts, trees, and street completed the overall effect. Here you can see the white X's on the green screen that were used for both tracking and focus reference. Our challenge with this shot was to balance a foreground that was lit for a sunny day to match with a second unit background that was shot on a very cloudy day. We did this by boosting the color information in the monochromatic background, creating an artificial highlight on the actors, and filling the sky with small digital lens flares to overexpose it severely.